To all who are joining us on television and online, I'll ask the city clerk to record this evening's attendance, please. And an approval of agenda, please. Councillor Harris, seconded by Councillor Ross Robinson. Disclosures of conflicts of interest this evening. Seeing none, we'll move on. Our agenda item number 5 is the audited financial statements. Brett Campbell with Allen, Paquette and Arsenault is here this evening. Mr. Campbell, the podium is yours.
Thank you very much. Just one sec here. Perfect. So I'll be leading you through this this presentation. Probably be better just to wait to the end for any questions. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. So we'll start with the first page here in the presentation is the statement of operations and accumulated surplus. It's the consolidated statement of operations, so that includes both water and general. A few things to note here is your revenue has stayed fairly consistent at $43,047,000 compared to $43,131,000. So revenue has stayed very consistent, but also your expenditures down here have stayed very consistent. $37,980,000 compared to $37,207,000 in 2020. So leaving you with a surplus for PSAB or public sector accounting standards. Just over $5 million at $5,067,000 compared to $5.9 in 2020. So overall, I'll be saying this again, but overall your operating expenses have stayed very consistent. I think it's roughly a 2.1% increase. It's broken down here by the general fund, the statement of operations. So on this page, your surplus is being generated for the most part from your general fund, which is, as expected, a $4.8 million surplus compared to $5.2 in 2020. Just for over here, as a percentage of revenues, we broke out your expenditures based off of as a percentage of revenues. As you can see, there's not a whole lot of fluctuation on any of the given departments. They stayed very much in line and consistent with 2020. Moving on to the following page here is the utility fund statement of operations. Just to take note here, your overall had a small surplus this year of $216,000 compared to $673 in 2020. Overall revenues have decreased slightly here to 5.6 compared to 6.3. Expenses, have stayed fairly consistent though. Moving into the year-end highlights here. So the first thing we'll see is the PSAB surplus, like I said before, is just over $5 million at $5,067,000. But for fund accounting, which does affect your budget, the total fund surplus for all funds was $12,426,000. The two more important things, as you can see down below, we break them out by the annual fund surpluses by each fund. Two main important things because they come into your budget in 2 years. General operating fund generated a surplus of $1.2 million, and water and sewer operating fund generated a deficit, a small deficit of $422,000. Down below, we'll see the statement of financial position highlights. So overall, financial assets have increased by $4.6 million. Liabilities have increased by 1.5, but overall, you're now in a net asset position, which is the first time since, as back as 2015, you had a net debt of $20 million, to put it in perspective. So that's a $22 million swing from 2015 to 2021. So you are in a net asset position, leaving you with an asset to liability ratio of 1.04 compared to a 0.97 in 2020. So now you're over that hump. You're in a net asset position, which essentially financial assets minus your financial liabilities will give you your net asset. So that's great to see. From a cash flow standpoint, $12,486,000 was generated from operating activities in the year. Tangible capital asset investments were $8.7 million, very similar to in 2020, $8.8 million. And net funds borrowed, so basically funds dispersed less repayments, of $1,024,000. So total increase in cash for the municipality of $4.7 million. Move on here to the next set of highlights. This breaks down the accounts receivable, water receivable, and as well as your accounts payable and long-term debt. The key thing here is with your water and sewer receivable. Total was $1.2 million in 2021, and 2020 was $1,492,000. But if you just go down to the second chart here, you'll see billings prior to Q4 of $566 compared to $920. So that's a huge, significant improvement from 2020. Those were basically accounts that were in arrears because your Q4 billing, or quarter four billing, does not come out until subsequent to year end. So sometime in early January or mid-January, that's when the billing comes out. So there's no chance of those to ever be collected, but this amount does. You do can be collect these. So that 920, that was actually building up over a couple years. So it's nice to see that basically cut in half. So that's a fantastic job by the finance department to be able to collect those arrear accounts. You can see the different breakdowns in accounts payable, and as you can see down here in long-term debt, current year advances of $5,040,000 with your current year repayments of $4 million, giving you just over that $1 million net advancements. And lastly on this page is a little bit of our ratios here. So first one is the debt service coverage ratio. So you'll see here it's 1.22 compared to 1.35. What that means is for every dollar of debt that's being serviced either through interest or through principal repayments, you're generating $1.22 of surplus. So obviously you always want to be above 1. So you are down a little bit from last year, but you're still a healthy 1.22 compared to 1.35. And lastly, the debt cost ratios. What those are is if you take your debt service costs, again, principal and interest, and you compare that as a percentage of your total expenditures for each fund, either for general or water, your debt costs amounted to 7.3% of total expenditures in general fund and 42 in water. But when you look at the budgeted amount, nothing's running away from you. It was budgeted for. Those cost ratios are budgeted for, so there's nothing out of the ordinary. Moving on. So we have your pension asset and post-employment liabilities and tangible capital assets. So the first thing to note here is accounting pension asset is grown a little bit to $5.3 million compared to $5.2 in 2020. Your second other post-employment liabilities, vested benefits has basically stayed the same as well, $2.3,336,000 compared to $2,316,000. That would be your severance benefits. And then non-vested benefits down below, the $782,000, that would be your sick leave of $782,000 compared to $795,000. So still very consistent with prior year. And just below, we'll see here again the tangible capital assets where you spent very similar to last year, the $8.8 million in investments in the infrastructure. So we'll move here to the statement of the reserve schedule. So this just summarizes the amounts that are in each reserve fund. In general operating reserve fund, there was $2,184,000. General capital, $20,481,000. Water sewer operating reserve, $308,000, and water and sewer capital reserve of $3,559,000, giving you a total in your reserves of $26,534,000. Now we'll move on to some of our key financial trends. So we'll start off with this are your trends of your operating expenses since 2015. As you can see, for the most part, there's not very many bumps in the road. Your average increase since 2015 ranges from 1.7% or 1.3% to 3.9%. You can see right here the averages of those increases. So once again, overall in the current year, your operating expenses increased by 2.1%. They may have moved a little bit individually, but overall you're seeing very consistent increases, essentially inflation, old inflationary increases. And lastly, this is our key financial trends for your long-term debt, expenditures, net debt, warrant assessment, and reserves. So a couple key things to note here is this line here trending downward. That is your net debt. So as I said before, you had net debt of $20 million back in 2015, $20,531,000. Now it's going negative, but you're going into a net asset position. So once again, $22 million swing in 6 years from 2015 to 2021 is great to see. The other one to take note is this blue line. That is your reserves over the year. So in 2015, you had reserves of $7.8 million. That's grown to $26,534,000, which has actually outpaced your long-term debt. So your long-term debt balance, they've actually caught your long-term debt balance here and just slightly exceeded it. So you actually have more in reserves than you do owing with long-term debt. Other than that, your other key trends here have stayed mostly the same. And if you look at your averages, your average long-term debt has increased by 0.5% over the past since 2015, and your reserves have increased on average 23% over that period. So once again, great to see. At this point in time, that's the end of my presentation for the highlights of the 2021 fiscal year. At this point in time, I'd take any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Campbell. Any questions for Mr. Campbell this evening? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Deputy. Just a note of information, good work on the part of the Finance Department, particularly in following up on the arrears that were due to the city. It was very good work. Thank you for the steadfast follow-up and staying on those accounts. The other thing I would note is when you look at the out years going back, just a note for the public, back as far as 2015, if you look at the rate, the expenditure rate from that time up until last fiscal year, the city has done very well. We have maintained our rate of expenses at a very reasonable pace. I think it's indicative of the fact that Miramichi citizens are getting value for their tax dollar, and that council and mayor and city administration and staff are being reasonable and responsible with the tax dollars available to the city. So thank you for everyone on a good job well done, and let's keep up the good work in being fiscally prudent and responsible with our city. Merci.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Any other questions for Mr. Campbell? All right, you're off the hook.
Great.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brett, from Alan Paquette and Arsenault. Moving